Let's get into the big story today. Donald Trump had a rough week. His beautiful economy crashed because some dum-dum came and tariffed every country on the planet. He tried to save it yesterday, but the markets are still crashing today because, again, some absolute moron keeps ramping up a trade war against China.
Donald Trump likely expected this to be just another late-night punchline. Another comedian would take a few shots, collect some laughs, and move on before the next controversy replaced the last one. He assumed Desi Lydic would follow that familiar formula. But instead of delivering a handful of jokes and changing the subject, she did something far more effective. She gathered the scandals, contradictions, public missteps, self-promotion, and carefully cultivated mythology that have surrounded Trump for years and laid them out in a way that made the bigger picture impossible to miss. What made the segment so powerful was not the humor alone, it was the clarity. Piece by piece, she stripped away the performance and exposed the machinery underneath. The more she connected the dots, the more Trump's usual defenses began to sound less like confidence and more like damage control. By the end, the audience was no longer simply laughing at punchlines. They were recognizing a pattern, and once that recognition set in, the jokes landed on an entirely different level. The timing could not have been better. Trump had already spent days navigating fresh controversies, awkward explanations, and uncomfortable headlines. Supporters and allies were repeatedly finding themselves forced to explain away comments, reinterpret statements, and defend situations that seemed increasingly difficult to justify. Desi understood something crucial. Criticism alone rarely causes problems for Trump. What truly gets under his skin is ridicule attached to a truth people already recognize. If a joke feels random, it can be dismissed. But when it captures something the audience already suspects, it becomes much harder to escape.
But in moments like this, there's one thing a serious leader does. Gather up all your closest friends on your payroll and make them say nice things about you.
Thank you for your leadership and thank you for everything you're doing.
Your leadership at the border, absolutely remarkable.
I want to thank you as well for the shipbuilding.
I want to thank you for standing up to the Chinese Communist Party.
And what you're doing now, I think.
That is why she avoided cheap insults and focused instead on building a larger narrative. She began by highlighting the sheer absurdity surrounding the moment. Investigations, public hearings, confusing statements, unexpected detours, and scandals that refused to disappear all existed alongside a political operation still attempting to present Trump as steady, strong, and completely in control. Rather than treating any single controversy as the main event, Desi approached each one as another piece of a much larger puzzle. She connected the dots between figures like Kash Patel, twisting themselves into impossible explanations, Trump's constant shifts between golfing, complaining, and celebrating himself, and an administration determined to portray every visible problem as evidence that everything was functioning perfectly. The audience laughed throughout, but the laughter gradually became sharper because the pattern was becoming increasingly obvious. Then she turned her attention directly toward Trump's public image. That was the point where the segment became especially cutting. For decades, Trump has relied on a carefully crafted identity. The wealthy businessman, the winner, the dominant figure in every room, the brilliant strategist, the master negotiator, the fighter who always comes out on top. Those labels have been central to his public brand for years. Desi did not challenge that image with lengthy arguments or political analysis. Instead, she placed reality beside the branding and allowed the contrast to speak for itself.
Whoa. Wow, what do you even say to that?
I'm gonna come.
No, stop it! Stop it! Not that.
On one side stood the image Trump has spent years projecting: success, power, confidence, and complete control. On the other stood mounting legal troubles, economic pressures, constant controversy, and an ongoing need for public validation that seemed impossible to hide. The contrast became difficult to ignore. With every joke, she made the carefully maintained image appear less like genuine strength and more like a never-ending effort to preserve a reputation. That distinction was what gave the segment its edge. Desi described him as someone trapped in a cycle of cringe-worthy behavior, so committed to maintaining the performance that even his unintended moments often became funnier than the jokes aimed at him. She portrayed him as a figure whose relationship with attention goes beyond simple enjoyment. It feels essential, almost necessary. The audience immediately understood the point, because Trump's public persona has long carried that characteristic. Even his outrage often appears calculated for maximum visibility. Even his anger can feel less spontaneous than strategic. The brilliance of the segment was that Desi did not need to exaggerate anything. She simply pointed toward patterns that were already visible. She also expanded the focus beyond Trump himself. After all, the story has never been exclusively about one person. It is also about the network of supporters, spokespersons, advisors, and loyal defenders who continually work to translate confusion into certainty and controversy into talking points. Desi mocked the individuals who rushed to defend every contradiction, justify every strange claim, and treat obvious confusion as if it were part of some larger master plan. She painted them not as a disciplined political force, but as something closer to salespeople traveling from town to town, enthusiastically promoting a miracle cure regardless of whether it actually worked. The comparison resonated because it captured something larger than any individual controversy. Trump's ability to maintain influence has often depended not only on his own performance, but also on the willingness of others to reinforce it. The image survives because there are always people prepared to treat the performance as reality. By the end of the segment, the sharpest observation was also the funniest. Desi suggested that Trump's greatest vulnerability may not be legal challenges, political opponents, critical headlines, or electoral setbacks. It may be laughter itself. He has repeatedly demonstrated an ability to survive outrage. He has weathered criticism, scandals, and public embarrassment that would have ended many other careers. Over time, controversy has become almost routine, but laughter operates differently. Laughter reduces the distance between the myth and the man. It removes the layers of grandeur and exposes something much more ordinary underneath. It transforms a larger-than-life figure into someone who suddenly appears smaller, more fragile, and far more dependent on approval than he would like others to believe. That is why the segment connected with so many viewers. Desi Lydic did not simply mock Donald Trump. She organized his contradictions into a coherent picture. She turned his vanity into a recurring rhythm, his public persona into a measurable performance, and his self-created legend into something audiences could compare directly against reality. Once people begin to see that gap clearly, everything changes. The boasts lose some of their impact. The threats feel less intimidating, and each new controversy arrives with the audience already understanding the pattern behind it.